What's going on, movie fans? My name is Michael Weir. I love talking about movies, and I love getting over colds, even though this one doesn't seem to be going away, and I'm in another hotel room. But with that said, today we are continuing on our Saw franchise review series, getting ready for Saw X at the end of this month. And today we talk about Saw 7, aka Saw 3D, aka Saw the Final Chapter, aka Saw the one where Jigsaw wears his hat backwards and becomes a meme for years to come, leading up to this year, 2023, where Blink-182 came back and Saw came back, and of course they used the backwards hat. It's a meme that people like to use when they talk about old people trying to look young. It was a bad look for Jigsaw.
How do you do, fellow kids?
What?
But with all that said though, guys, today we're going to talk about Saw 7, and this is to me the first really big misstep in the entire Saw franchise. The movie has a very low budget feeling, whether it's the quality of how they filmed, and there's something to be said about how that first movie really did have the smallest budget in the franchise. It looked great and looked gritty and somehow stood the test of time, whereas Saw 7, a movie that came out 7 years after that original movie, didn't hold up. It's just, it looks very blue in quality. I don't know how else to say it. You watch Saw 7, there's like blue hue to everything. The movie's also titled with 3D, which is something we'll get into in a little bit. And of course, it's also titled The Final Chapter, which is something studios do when they are trying to milk a franchise dry and get as many fans from those original movies in, because they're like, oh, the final chapter, I gotta be a part of it. And in a horror movie franchise, anytime you see a final chapter, that doesn't mean the final chapter. It's just how to milk money out of fans, hoping to get them in there for that nostalgia kick one more time. It's very unfortunate. With that said, let's get into my review for Saw 7.
Game over.
And so guys, Saw 3D, Saw the Final Chapter, whatever you want to call it, we're just going to call it Saw 7 from now on in this review. But Saw 7 is directed by Kevin Gruchard, once again, who also directed Part 6. And so you get that continued new flavor from that director, and that flavor really carries over from 6 to 7 when you have this director show characters in this movie that deserve to be in Saw traps once again. It's something they tried in the franchise for the first time in Part 6, where you're actually rooting for the traps. You're not necessarily rooting for Jigsaw or whoever's taking the mantle of Jigsaw at the time, and you're definitely not rooting for the people in the traps because they're not great people. So you want to see these traps play out, you want to see them get gruesome, and they carry that into Part 7. There's several little games that go on in this movie, and I feel like these movies were all thrown into this movie for just get as many traps as possible into a movie, which is a dislike we'll talk about in a little bit. But the main game for this movie, the main storyline for this movie, is a guy who claims that he was captured by Jigsaw, went through one of his tests, and learned his lesson, and is now selling a book on it. Well, as it turns out, all of that happened way before Jigsaw ever died, and so the final game, because remember in Part 6, Jigsaw was like, this is my final game. Now, the real final game from Jigsaw in Part 7 is this guy having to go through an actual test where he has to go through what he claimed he went through previously and save all of his friends and family members along the way. So because he's sort of a lying scumbag using the Jigsaw murders as a way to get through, they once again get you to root for the traps in this movie. It's not a bad concept for a Saw movie. Again, it worked in Part 6, so I get why they did it in Part 7. But with all that said, let's get into my likes and my dislikes. The first like I have for this movie is going to be seeing Chester Bennington once again in the Saw movies. Like, R.I.P. to Chester. He was an absolutely fantastic vocalist for Linkin Park, and it's just sad to see him gone now. But he's in this movie, and that's really cool. He's strapped to that seat, well, he's glued to that seat in that car during his trap. And of course, he plays a very vile character, so once again, you're kind of rooting for him and all the people that are in the trap with him to get what they deserve. And the other like is kind of a spoiler, but I'm not gonna throw a spoiler tag up because this was the worst kept secret ever leading into Saw 7, and that is the return of Dr. Gordon, who turns out to be the finale apprentice to Jigsaw. He shows up at the end and takes out Hoffman and says game over and slams the door, a position he was in at the very beginning of the franchise. I actually really like that aspect of this movie, and I think that there are portions of it that are done really well. Like I said, it was a worst kept secret because back in 2010, when this movie came out, man, I was so locked in on this thing. I was checking every fan website. I was checking every Facebook page that had to do with Saw the Final Chapter. I was just so excited for it to finally get to a place where we were going to have all the questions answered. And they do a good job answering the questions in this movie. But yeah, Dr. Gordon returning, to me at the time, I remember standing in line at the midnight showing for Saw 7, and me and a bunch of friends and then a group of people that were all there to see Saw 7 as well that were also equally hyped, and then we turned out to be the only people going to see Saw 7. But I remember we were all theorizing before the movie, like, you think Dr. Gordon's gonna return? No, I don't think he's gonna return. Yeah, he might return. Oh, that'd be so cool if he returned. And sure enough, he returns pretty early on in the movie, and then in the end, he is revealed once again as the final actual assistant to Jigsaw and the final apprentice that was going to take over the Jigsaw legacy. Unfortunately, the movie didn't do very well for my reasons we're about to get into, my dislikes. I think that had this movie done really well, you could have seen a few more movies with Dr. Gordon continuing on as the Jigsaw Killer. Unfortunately, again, the movie didn't do well, and we're going to get into why right now in my dislikes. So if I'm being honest, the first dislike for this movie is that it feels very stretched out as a film. The first time in the franchise, like I always felt like the filler moments in the previous franchise were flashbacks that sort of filled in the gaps on things you needed to know, and I didn't have a problem with that. And this movie does have a few flashbacks letting you know what's going on with the main player of the main game, but overall those are very small for the movie, and they fill this movie with as many traps as they can, and they're very unrealistic traps, which I guess is a side dislike for this column. So it's the fact they stretch the movie out with very unrealistic traps. And so you just get trap after trap after trap. And while it's cool to see these traps, because at the time we were like, well, at least it's, it's the final chapter, but now we know it's not the final chapter. There's been 2 more movies in the Saw universe, and we're about to get a 3rd movie in the Saw universe since the final chapter released. So the movie in and of itself, like I said, it just feels stretched out with other traps so they can pad the runtime for this little storyline they had, because they wanted to finish off the Hoffman storyline, which makes me believe that part 6 really was supposed to be the final movie in the franchise. And they were like, but if Hoffman lives, we can get a little more money out of this franchise. And that's what it feels like that they did, unfortunately. There's another 2 aspects of this movie that I'm going to combine. First of all, the writing for this movie is pretty awful. The dialogue in this movie, where you have different characters talking to each other, feels really rough. It feels like somebody just spit this out of a machine. Like, that's what characters in a Saw movie would say to each other, right? Like, if ChatGPT existed back when this movie came out, it wouldn't surprise me if they were like, yeah, a robot actually spit this out of a computer, and that's what it thought that 2 characters would say to each other in a Jigsaw movie. And so it was pretty rough there. But it's not just the writing. The other dislike I'm going to put with the bad writing is going to be how bad that 3D effect is, because it looks like something that is so terrible and such a ripoff of the real 3D craze that was going on at the time with Avatar. The 3D effect in this movie is just like you see a needle come at you and a saw gets thrown across the room, and every trap there's something that comes toward the camera. But when you watch this movie now 13 years later, and you're watching these effects from 3D on a non-3D screen without 3D glasses, they just look so cheesy, and they make the viewing of this movie so unenjoyable. And I don't remember, I must have seen it in 3D when it came out, so I don't remember disliking it. So maybe that 3D effect works if you've got a 3D TV now, or you've got 3D glasses. But just watching this movie on a regular TV without the 3D effect, it's really rough. I wish they had released 2 different versions of this, maybe one that wasn't 3D. That would have been nice. So I'm going to put the dialogue in just a cash grab of 3D that they tried to ram into this movie for no reason. And it's just that 3D was big, because back in the early 2010s, you had Avatar, and it made so much money that every movie was like, yeah, I don't care if it's a horror movie with it where it makes no sense whatsoever to throw 3D into it, throw 3D into Saw, the final chapter, and we'll even title it that, so people that love 3D are be like, oh, I want to see this in 3D. Like I said, the effect of 3D does not hold up 13 years later. And the final dislikes I have, 2 more things that I'm going to combine together. First of all, Jill, the wife of Jigsaw, gets a terrible send-off in this movie twice. That's right, she's actually killed in a dream sequence, and then she's killed for real toward the end of the movie by Detective Hoffman. And both times she's killed, it just feels so unceremonious. Like, you've got the wife of Jigsaw. Not only has she actually been helping him carry out his plan this entire time, and she deserves a better send-off. I'm not saying don't kill her. I'm saying that she deserved a better send-off than what she got in a warehouse, not on display, completely away from everyone else. It just seemed very cheap. Like, maybe the actress was like, I don't have much of a future in Hollywood, but I don't want to be in these movies anymore. Please kill me. Just kill me. And that's what it seems like she said to them. They're like, you want to be killed? Oh, we're going to kill you twice, and it's going to be in 3D. And so I really don't like how they did that with her character, but then adding into that dislike, this movie feels like a B movie. This movie feels like a step down from the rest of the franchise. I mentioned earlier that the quality of filming in this movie feels off. The whole screen has like a weird blue hue to it. It's rough, and unfortunately, it's something that they didn't spend a lot of time on because that first movie had such a low budget and it feels so gritty when you watch it now almost 20 years later. But when you watch this movie 20 years later, you're like, man, this is still a dark, gritty movie, and that gritty feel is great for that first Saw movie. You get to this, it just feels plastic, it feels fake, it feels like somebody slapped a filter on a digital camera, said add 3D effects to it, and we will be good to go. That's what it feels like, and that's very unfortunate. The movie feels like a B movie for its quality of filming, for its dialogue. It feels like a B movie because the traps feel so unrealistic. And I've heard people say, oh, well, you couldn't make some of those traps. Well, some of those traps in the first 6 Saw movies really make sense. Like the carousel trap, you need a carousel and a shotgun that goes off on a timer. It's not that unrealistic. But in this movie, you have like a super oven that creates itself when the woman gets pulled down on a chain. In this movie, you have a guy who gets zip lined up by a noose. Like, it's just, you have some things that happen in this movie that are completely unrealistic. The car scenario with Chester, again, it's great seeing Chester in this movie, but the car scenario is very forced. So you have this B movie feel with a B movie effects from an A franchise. And the last reason I think this movie is like a bad B movie, not even a good B movie, but a bad B movie. Every time there's a girl that's in peril, her tits are out.
My God, that's disgusting. And where? Where did he post those? Which one?
Okay,
Which one did he post it on?
And I don't know why they decided they had to do that. You have a woman hanging from the ceiling at the beginning of the movie and just right there. And then even Jill, the wife of Jigsaw, when she gets killed the first time, is in her underwear. And it's just like who made these decisions? You got, oh, we'll throw 3D effects in there and we'll put some unrealistic traps in there. Oh, and every girl will have her boobs out. That's how it should be. Like, who was doing that? Who gave the green light to do all of these bad B-movie decisions? Overall, guys, I'll say that Saw 7, the final chapter, is a very weak outing for the Saw franchise and the weakest of my rewatch and review series so far. I think that this movie could have done something special, especially for the fans of the franchise, the ones that are super fans, the ones that wanted to see something big and just gigantic in the final chapter. And instead, the studio executives got greedy, threw in a bunch of 3D effects, threw on a bunch of boobs, and like, that's a horror movie. That'll work in 2010. And unfortunately, not only did it not work in 2010, doesn't stand the test of time, and it feels like the weakest movie in the franchise, which is crazy to me because Saw 6 felt so refreshing. Like, ooh, they breathed new life into this. I wonder where they're going to go. Oh, the final chapter? Okay, they're going to go out on a bang. And then they didn't. And that's too bad. With all that said, though, guys, those are my thoughts, and that's my review for Saw 7. If you've seen Saw 7 and you've got thoughts and you've got comments, throw that in the comment section down below. Let me know your thoughts of this movie. Do you agree or disagree with me? Maybe you think some things about this movie that I didn't mention. I'd love to know your thoughts. And as always, guys, if you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button. It helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. And guys, we got to the end of Saw 7, 3D, the final chapter, the backwards hat review. And anyway, we got to the end of it. And now we're going to talk about my favorite trap in the movie. And we've been talking about these all along the way. And I'm just finding my favorite trap in every Saw movie. And while this movie's pretty unrealistic and this movie doesn't make a lot of sense, and narratively, the traps don't all fit in this movie, including the first one, which is really disappointing, I think my favorite trap in the entire movie is going to be the fishhook quiet trap. I don't know what else it's called, but basically this girl has a fish hook that's on a string that's leading to her stomach that is on a key, and it has to be pulled out of her. It's horrifying when you think about it like that. You can get caught on all kinds of things. But there's also another element. She's tied down, and there are 4 different spokes, we'll call them. Of course, 3D spokes that are going to come at the camera, but there's 4 different spokes, and every time she makes a noise, the machine hears it and moves them closer to her neck. So while she has 60 seconds to get out of this trap, she also has to have the string pulled out of her mouth, and she can't make noise while it happens, because if there's noise, those spokes will get closer. And to me, it's an interesting trap because it kind of reminded me of the breathing trap from the last movie that I almost made my favorite trap. So when it got to this movie, I was like, oh, those are kind of similar, where you can't breathe in the one, and this one you can't make any noise even though you're going through this horrific event. And I thought that was kind of cool. Overall, not my favorite trap in the entire franchise, but this isn't my favorite movie in the entire franchise, so I don't know what you expect. With that said, though, guys, if you like this and you want to watch any more of my Saw reviews, you can click right there. Or if you want to check out any of my 2023 movie reviews, you can click right there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all next time.